What's going on, family? This is your boy, Dr. D, DeAndre, here with you for another episode of PickEd Speaks. And listen, this is absolutely an episode that you do not want to miss. So I've said it on my social media, everywhere. You do not want to miss this. So begin to share this with your family, share it with your friends, share it with your young men, with your young women, share it with everyone that you know, because you do not want to miss this episode. But before we bring on our guest for tonight, I first want to say thank you as those of you all who continue to watch our episodes each and every Monday night. You are the reason why this is going as strong as it is. So thank you so much for watching every Monday night. We have some amazing guests coming in the next couple of weeks. You all know that at the end of the month, we always have our panel discussion with the men and the women, just having just dialogue, hearing different perspectives from the male's point of view, as well as the woman's point of view. So we want to make sure, please join us next Monday as we have back Kim Wilson, as well as Forrest Round Jr., who served as the co-host for that, along with two amazing additional individuals who will share their amazing perspectives on just topics that are happening that we've either encountered over the course of this past month or just things that are happening in our lives. If you have questions tonight, please make sure you throw them on the screen, because of the fact that I know that the information that you're going to hear tonight is going to be very beneficial for your lives. So please make sure that you are posting information. As I always ask, if you're interested in having your information, having your business, we this year are making sure that we're promoting as many Black businesses as we can. So if you know a Black business, if you are a Black business and you want to be highlighted, you want to be showcased on our show just talked about during our ads, or just for me to mention you, please make sure you email at inspire@IamDrPickett.com. We want to make sure that you are being highlighted. We want to make sure that people are seeing you, are seeing your business. So please make sure that people that you email at inspire@IamDrPickett.com, so that people can know who you are and that we can highlight you. But again, I said to you all, tonight is going to be an amazing, amazing show. And I'm excited to have this brother on. I got a chance to meet him and engage with him as I serve currently on one of the state committees to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. And he had the opportunity to do a testimony before us a couple of weeks back, and on our topic of civil asset forfeiture. And there's so many questions around that even I did not know about. And I know that there's so many people that I encounter on a regular basis who don't know just the intricacies of what that is. And so I asked him, would he come on and have just an open dialogue and discussion about what it is, some of the rights that you have, some of the things that people don't know as it pertains to things like you're having your items seized, and then of course understanding what forfeiture is, and then of course just having other discussions about things that we've noticed in the criminal justice system, or just things that we've noticed in the country just lately. And so if you would allow me, please join me in welcoming the attorney. I'm only going to say that one time tonight. The attorney, gentleman, great guy from this great state of Tennessee, Mr. Christopher M. Bellamy. How are you, great sir?
How you doing, my friend? Really, it's good to be here. So hello to everyone out there in the verse.
In the verse,
right? In the verse.
In the verse, right? And so before we get deep into just kind of discussing this topic and any other topics, kind of tell everyone just kind of your background, who you are, some credentials and things of that nature, because people are asking, well, who is this dude? So who is Chris Bellamy?
So I live in the great state of Tennessee, but I'm from the great state, even though we don't act like it sometimes, of Alabama. Okay. So I'm a country boy. I joined the Coast Guard right out of high school. I did that for a while. Got my education while I was in Colorado Tech. Decided to further that after a stint in the Persian Gulf for Operation Enduring Freedom. Got accepted and went to Vanderbilt Law School. Came out right at the recession, so that was fun. 2010, and just kind of made it work. Hung my own shingle for a while. All of those things. then decided to become a state prosecutor, and we can talk about that a little bit at some point. Pursued that opportunity, and now I'm at a firm, Neal & Harwell. I'll be there 4 years, actually tomorrow. It'll be my four-year anniversary. So right now I do a lot of white-collar criminal defense work, and litigation. That's where I'm at.
And when ultimately, once you kind of went from, you talk about a journey of nuances, what made you go into law?
So, it's interesting. What I found out in every sort of aspect, whether it's the military, corporations, government entities, whatever aspect, attorneys tended to have a voice. It was almost like you had some instant credibility. And I like that, that as a tool. I felt like I could use that. And so far that has paid off for me. And additionally, when I was looking at it, I was actually deciding between an MBA and a JD. And what I saw based on my research was that a lot of the C-suite executives, your CEOs, executive VPs, they were bringing JDs instead of, just an MBA. And so I felt like that gave me a little more flexibility with the JD.
Awesome. And when you came before the committee a couple of weeks back, we as a committee have been having this conversation and bridging and educating and doing research, if you will, on civil asset forfeiture. And that is a conversation or a topic that is not familiar, that is not well talked about in our communities, some not even really heard of.
Right.
And so on the surface level, how would you describe, or what would you say is civil asset forfeiture?
Well, civil asset forfeiture by design is basically the government's ability to use this mechanism so that those who are engaged in criminal enterprise can't necessarily profit from that. And it was really structured and intended for, billionaire, multimillionaire, billionaire type criminal enterprises who were international. And so we couldn't necessarily reach them with our current criminal justice system, but they had assets in the United States. And so what the intent was to, okay, well, we're not going to let you, we can't lock you up for the things that you're doing, but we're not going to allow you to have a beach house in Miami and come in and enjoy that, right? While we can't lock you up for, we know you are distributing narcotics. We know that you're running, minors. We know that you're avoiding our tax code. We know you're doing all these things, but you've avoided our criminal justice system. So this gives us the ability to at least punish you and not allow you to benefit from.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, though, that even in that scheme of things, though, it seems that it has more so, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it really falls more on the backs of people of color because of, I guess, the way that the system is set up, where we can't necessarily fight the fight, if you will. How would you describe, I guess, how the system is set up that we somehow maybe are the ones who fall victim of this particular entity?
Right. And so let me qualify my comment here. If we were just talking about a resource or tool that, let's say, the FBI, right, could use, we're talking, high level, professional, Department of Justice. These folks, most of them have, professional degrees. Most of them have a lot of experience, and they don't necessarily just police our community, right? They have a target. They're going after the big fish. If this was just a tool for them, I wouldn't have an issue. Here's the problem. Johnny B. Good, who dropped out of high school, may or may not have gotten a GED. His uncle was the sheriff and decided to give him a badge, can also use this tool. And so what you have is a disparity of enforcement. And this is no different than what you see in the criminal justice system throughout. If we give a local law enforcement officer or a department a tank, guess what they're going to use? They're going to find a reason to use the tank.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're policing, and we know this, the evidence speaks for itself. If they're policing, over policing, unfairly policing communities of color, that tank is going to be driving down the communities of us, of people of color. That's just a fact. And so this tool is being used against us because that's where the policing is happening.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be asking periodically a couple of questions that were sent in by some of the viewers. And all those questions is we talk about this idea of forfeiture, but there is another aspect. There is some people have a complex of, the difference between seizure and forfeiture. Can you explain that difference of what is the difference between a seizure and a forfeiture?
Right. So basically, a seizure is a government agency, the state, however you want to qualify that, will come in and take something that belongs to you or that's in your possession. Right. Now, that could be temporary. A seizure can then turn into a forfeiture. Right. And then when we talk about forfeiture, we have civil and we have criminal. So it can turn into a forfeiture, but a seizure is literally, you get pulled over, an officer smells marijuana, they call a dog out, they find some pot in your car, they seize your vehicle. Now your vehicle is in possession of the state and it's evidence. So you may or may not get that vehicle back at that point. That's all it means. That's all it means.
And you actually mentioned something that, again, that we even learned about, that difference between criminal and civil, the criminal asset forfeiture and then criminal asset forfeiture, because there obviously is a difference.
Right.
What would you say is that? How would you classify those differences between the two?
So let me say this. I don't have an issue with criminal forfeiture, and most people I know, attorneys, community folks, no one has an issue with criminal forfeiture, because criminal forfeiture says, hey, if you use this instrument to commit a crime, or this item thing you acquired because you committed crimes, right? You're a dope boy, you got out there, you hustled, you were able to buy your mom a nice Benz with that money, you got caught, they take the Benz. Okay, that's just part of the game. Let's call it what it is. That's criminal forfeiture. But they had to convict you of a crime to get there. That means beyond a reasonable doubt. That means a jury of your peers, or you pled guilty to a crime for them to be able to then seize that item. Mm-hmm. And then they have to link it back to the crime that you were committing, right? So those things I have no issue with. The problem with civil forfeiture is you have to be suspected of a crime, probable cause, right? So you probably committed a crime, 51%. Maybe more likely than not, you committed the crime. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be charged with the crime. But they can then take your vehicle, take your money, take your property with very little oversight and very little due process accorded to you. If you are charged with the crime, everybody knows this, you have a right to counsel, right? So you charged with a crime, they seize your property, you have a right to counsel, you go through a process, and look, that process is flawed because we're people and people are involved, there's flaws. So I'm not sitting here saying that process gets it right every time, but at least there is a process for you. Mm-hmm. On the civil forfeiture side, you are not afforded an attorney. You have no constitutional right to counsel. So if you can't afford to hire an attorney to then fight the system to try to get your property back, you kind of SOL.
And I want people to hear that again, because of the fact that, the way that the system is, like if it's in a civil, if it's being civilly done, if I'm not hearing that right, if it's civilly done, it's your burden. It's on you to actually have to prove the why.
Well, yes, in some states, right? So let's break this down a little bit further. You have federal civil forfeiture laws, and then you have each state has their own. And you do see the criminal justice system, this system in and of itself moves very slowly. You do see, like the state of Georgia, like state of Tennessee, different states are now paying attention to this stuff and saying it just doesn't feel right. And so you're starting to see some changes. Before 2 years ago in Tennessee, you're absolutely right. It was on me to prove that my property was not affiliated with the crime. So the cop just had to take my stuff, make an accusation, take my stuff. And then I had to prove that he was wrong about that. Now, at least we're at the point where the officer has to prove at least probable cause that whatever they seized or took from me was associated with some criminal activity or the product of a criminal activity.
And who is capable of seizing your property? Who's allowed to seize property?
Any law enforcement agency, any law enforcement officer, any law enforcement agency.
And can any type of property be seized?
Yep, as long as they can loosely tie it to the commission of a crime or the fruits of a crime. So if I robbed a bank, got some money, went and bought some jewelry, they can seize that jewelry. If I robbed a bank, went and bought some books, they could take those books, computers, whatever. They can take it. Property, they can seize it. So if you're smart, and I'm being a little flippant here, if you took that money, if you robbed a bank, took that money and paid for somebody's education, I mean, they can't take that from them, right? That's one thing you can't seize.
Well, true.
Knowledge.
I mean, that's true. and what protections does someone has for the property that's actually seized, if any?
And like I said, like each state is different, but what we see a lot of times is a lot of our folks live with family members. And what law enforcement typically doesn't do is try to figure out what belongs to who and how something was acquired. They just go in and take everything. So then, let's say you living at your mom's, you commit this crime, they go in and take your mom's new TV and all this other stuff, alleging that it was associated with some activity that you were doing. She could then turn in a basically saying, hey, no, this is my property. This belongs to me, and I have receipts to show. I have proof to show that this was mine. And sometimes that's successful, but again, what we know is, I mean, in Tennessee, you have to put up a bond to even be able to fight the system. You got to put money up to get your stuff back. So when somebody's looking at it and they're saying, all right, well, they took, $500 in cash, it's going to cost me $1,000 to get that $500 back. It's just not worth it.
Right.
And it doesn't leave you with a record. It's not criminal, right? So there are no criminal implications. It's just the government coming in and saying, this is easy money. We're going to take it and make you try to get it back.
And is there any time where a court-appointed attorney is given as a right in any of these portions of forfeitures? No,
civil forfeiture, absolutely not. Criminal forfeiture, yes, because it's part of the due process part, right? So you have to be convicted of a crime. Therefore, you have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney is provided to you. So that's in the Constitution. That's your constitutional right. Civil forfeiture, there is no constitutional right.
And I think that is the one thing I think at times where you fall into a place because of the fact that from the civil side, again, if you can't afford representation, then you're, like I said, you're SOL if you can't afford representation, because you're now at the liberty of either it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's either you get an attorney to try to fight this, or we keep it, or you get an attorney to fight it so you can get it back.
A lot of times, yeah, a lot of times. A lot of states are saying, no, we need another layer of review on this because that's too much power. And, law enforcement officers and agencies are incentivized because they get to keep it. They get to keep what they take. So they're incentivized to abuse the system. And so a lot of states are now saying we want another layer of review. So the district attorney's office has to review that. And if they find that probable cause doesn't exist, they then have to file a motion with the court asking for your property to be returned to you. So there's some states are trying to do some things different, but the majority of states say, hey, law enforcement officer, you can take it. You don't have to include the district attorney's office. You don't include attorneys in it. This little, 5-man police agency can take people's stuff, basically, if they're creative enough, whenever they want to.
And I have a question just popped up on the screen. We're going to catch that question in just a second, as well as talk about, maybe some personal issues that you have actually seen in this regard, but also discuss, why some of these lawmakers and even here in Georgia, and this is something I've noticed after researching, why some of these lawmakers are making it hard to actually pass legislation that actually cracks down a little bit more, add more protection or add more teeth, if you will, to this concept of asset forfeiture, as well as a conversation that you and I had about the Constitution aspect of this whole concept. So we're going to talk about this and more. We'll be right back. Again, I have Chris Bellamy, who is giving amazing information. Please make sure if you have people not watching right now, share this right now. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we are on Twitter. Share this right now. Get people in because they need to hear this information. This is PickEd Speaks. We'll be right back after this. PickEd Speaks. We'll be right back.
Are your students ready to succeed in today's changing environment? The necessity for innovative educational consulting is here, and Woodson and Associates, we're ready to help. You can provide state-of-the-art diversity and educational leadership. Your students will always have the resources needed to succeed with Woodson and Associates.
In a world of uncertainty, where it seems we are going through the motions of life with no direction, and our new norm and way of doing things have somewhat crippled the intimacy of our connections, while the government continues to transition. With time moving on, so are we at the For Better Futures Foundation, working with families in our community to redefine our norm, to engage our community through volunteerism, educational advancement, and family assistance. So, don't let time pass you by, but join the For Brighter Futures Foundation movement at www.forbrighterfutures.com. All right, we are back. I am here with Chris Bellamy. We're having great discussions, not only just about civil asset forfeiture, but about our criminal justice system and just other discussions we're going to have. Before we actually left to go on that particular break, there was a comment that actually came in. I want to actually ask it now. It is actually, ironically enough, from my cousin, who's actually watching with us right now. And she asked the question. She said, I throw away my receipts after a while. How long should we keep receipts on large expense purchases?
That's a good question. And, I honestly, at this day and age, with the ability to scan receipts and basically save them in the cloud indefinitely, or put them in a place where on a device where it's not, taking up space, I would suggest keeping them indefinitely. I mean, because there's no reason not to at this point, to be quite frank.
And as you all can see, that was not a civil asset forfeiture question. So should you all have any other questions that you just want to ask him since he's here, just make sure you throw him on the screen so that we can ask him. He's here, so you might as well ask him while I got him, right? So I wanted to kind of go back into this because of the fact that we were talking about this this whole concept again between civil and criminal forfeiture and asset forfeiture. And you and I have had discussions about this concept of criminal, because as you said, many people don't necessarily have major issues around the criminal asset forfeiture, because yes, at the end of the day, listen, you did the crime and whatever happened, it is what it is. But when it comes to this whole civil asset forfeiture concept and the way that the laws are fit, because at the end of the day, we base off of law, I had a conversation about it with my committee, and you actually even mentioned it inside of the testimony, where you said that even you went as far as even say that you believe that there's a concept that the civil asset forfeiture concept could even be deemed unconstitutional. In that concept and that mindset, why did you say that? And what examples do you think presents that?
Well, the fact of the matter is, our whole fragile democracy / republic is based in its entirety on our belief and adherence to the Constitution, right? And so, built within the Constitution are these amendments, the Fourth Amendment, which everyone, if you don't know it, you should know it. Google it right now. The Fourth Amendment basically protects you from the government coming in, searching, seizing, taking your property without due process and probable cause, and swearing on an oath and affirmation that they have a right to be there because you've committed this crime, or there's a probable cause that you've committed this crime. So it stops the government from being able to just come in, bust down your door, and take something. Well, let me restate that. It doesn't stop them from doing it. It's an accountability tool. So they can do it. They're not supposed to, but we know our justice system does things it's not supposed to all the time. But it's supposed to allow them, or allow court to hold them accountable for their actions, right? And so when you're talking about civil forfeiture, a part of that due process is taken out of it. The government can come in, accuse you of something, and then some of those protections that's built into the Fourth Amendment are taken away from you. And that's the issue we have. Because at the end of the day, it's clear to me and anyone that looks at the numbers, and I won't go into all of them right now, you can easily look those up. But I want to say the last number I looked at, 80-something% of the drug enforcement agency, the DEA, right? And we know that this tool is a primary tool for them. It's a great tool for them. They deal with, big dope deals, international crime, so on and so forth. Only 80% of their seizures and forfeitures are from a criminal or less than, excuse me, let me restate that. 80% are from civil forfeiture, meaning there was never criminal prosecution pursued. So they go in, they say, oh, this looks like dope money. A dog hits on it, whatever, they take it, never pursue criminal prosecution. So what does that tell you? If I think you've committed a crime and my only interest is the property or the asset of value around that crime, am I interested in stopping criminal conduct? Absolutely not. So now I'm questioning your motives.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm gonna get a little deeper. Not only am I questioning your motives, but I'm questioning whether or not you want this conduct to continue, because now we have a symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The more you make, the more I can take.
Right.
If I leave you on the streets and I allow you to keep doing what you're doing, the more I can come back and keep feeding off that tree. You see what I'm saying? If I take you from that and I lock you up, sure, I've taken drugs off the street. I've minimized the impact on certain communities, but I've also taken billions of dollars out of my agency.
Mm. And we've actually seen that in quite a few, even here in Georgia, particularly, I believe it was Butts County. There was forfeiture, I think up to $600,000 of worth of property or money that was given, and they actually used those funds to purchase new cars for the department, the computers, and these are things that people, again, and this was majority out of civil asset forfeiture money, not necessarily criminal money. This was money that people could not actually, again, go back and get, either because of as you said, the small amount of it, and it defeated the purpose of actually going to spend all this money to get that small amount. We've heard stories about there was a situation, I believe there was a mother who had just cashed her check, I believe. And she had just cashed her check, and then she got stopped, and they actually seized that money, and she was literally, that was her rent money.
Yep.
And she couldn't pay rent. These are small things that actually happen. Being in this moment, being that Have you seen any specific stories or situations personally that has either made you raise your eyebrows or just kind of made you have to fight even more for this topic in either your state or just things you've seen as you've researched across the country?
Yeah, and my answer to that question is going to touch a little bit on something you kind of alluded to before the break. So when I was a state prosecutor, I saw this, and again, the DA's office was not directly involved in the civil asset forfeiture part, but you work with law enforcement, you're around court, you hear, they're presenting to the judge, you're in the courtroom, so you hear these things, or someone comes and complains to you and say, hey, this happened, it wasn't fair. I've heard with my own 2 ears a law enforcement agency officer negotiating with a potential criminal defendant and saying, hey, we got this money from you. You could fight for it, or I tell you what, you let us keep it. You walk away. We won't pursue criminal charges. What does that sound like?
Wow.
Or you know what? I tell you what. We took your car. You had $5,000 in cash. Yeah, you said you got it because you sold another car you had and they paid you in cash. But we smell weed. We pulled you over. Yeah, there was no weed in there. So yeah, you'll probably get something back, but you're gonna have to fight for it. We'll let you get your car back. You give us the money. I've heard those type of negotiations with my own 2 ears. So if that doesn't make someone raise their eyebrow and say, what is this? Like, why are law enforcement, why are police officers? Why is Officer Joe Blow over here basically negotiating with somebody's rights, their constitutional rights? Because now you sound like a mob boss now. Mm-hmm. You sound like an enforcer. You don't sound like a law enforcement. You don't sound like you're protecting and serving anything. Mm-hmm. That's my issue with it. Now, to answer the other question that you kind of alluded to, why do we have politicians? Why do we have government actors who are not involved, who are not police officers, just kind of allowing this to happen? It was brought up during the civil forfeiture hearing that you have lobbyists, the sheriff's big national lobbying group, law enforcement agencies, big national lobbying group. But I'm going to take it down to the smaller local community level. And you're involved in government right now, you know what it's about. It's about tax dollars, right? Mm-hmm. How can we afford the infrastructure? How can we pay for these things? Police are typically one of the larger line items in a local community budget. So if I'm the chief of police and I'm like, hey, don't worry about us. We're not going to come asking you for cars. We were able to get our own cars because we were able to not only get drugs off the street and illegal money, but also we were able to get our own cars. That new building we were asking you for, don't worry about it. We were able to pay for it ourselves. Those raises that I want my officers to have, you know what? You can use that money for that. We got all the equipment we need. We're good. We won't ask you for anything. So if I'm the mayor or city council, I'm over here like, oh, okay, great. No, none of my constituents are complaining. This isn't necessarily impacting my voting group. Nobody's complaining. Let's just keep letting this happen. And that's what you've seen across the country. So folks are being incentivized at every level of government to allow this to happen because it's not negatively impacting them. They're only seeing positives coming from it.
And here in the state of Georgia, we have had since 2018, 6 pieces of legislation that has actually has been introduced that has either tried to combat this concept of civil asset forfeiture or have tried to help add additional protections. And they've all, after doing research on all 6 of these pieces of legislation that was introduced to us that we learned about during the hearing, I went and dug deeper, and I noticed that every single one of those pieces of legislation were introduced by a Republican lawmaker, particularly white men lawmakers. Here in the state of Georgia, the Republican Party has been the party of majority for for at least the last 10, 11 years. They make the committee assignments. They determine what goes to committee, what comes out of committee. Every single one of them have made it out of committee, but they've never actually made it through rules to actually get on the floor. Every single one of them. And I've always been, I kept looking at it, I've been curious, like, why, wait a minute, why is a bill or why is legislation that is sponsored by a Republican, that seems like it is favorable outside of the committee, goes to the Rules Committee, but doesn't necessarily make it to the actual floor. And then I started thinking about something which alludes to this concept of what you were saying. And I may be far-fetched with this, but I don't know, it may be a conspiracy theory, but this is my thought process around it. I think it's interesting where it's a twofold for me. One, I feel as if people are who are not on the receiving end, who are on the receiving end of it, put forth legislation to seem as if they are doing a thing. So it seems like they are, they have an interest, they're protected, or they're trying to make it seem as if, we're in it. We agree with it. We're here with it. This is a problem. It only becomes a problem, I believe, when it affects someone who looks like them. But then when they can work it out, it's no longer a big deal. Like after, this person says, "Oh, we worked that out." Oh, it's not a big deal anymore. But also, again, as you said, I also feel like once they put that legislation forth, I feel like those small towns like a Butts County or others will say, well, listen, be mindful. If you change this law, if you mess with this here, we have to come and ask you for this. We have to ask you for that. We have a way of doing this. So why touch it? Just put it on the books, to say that, you're making an effort, but just don't, because what happens is going to affect us and we're going to have to come and ask you. And I just feel like you're kind of feeding and you're kind of trying to pacify, but you're never going to change a thing, because at the end of the day, it's you see the effects and if I'm wrong, or if I'm just kind of far-fetched in my belief and my mindset, let me know. But I just kind of feel like there is more to the stories of why, especially when you're in the position of power, but yet you're not pushing, and you initiate, if you will, the legislation, but you don't see it through. And then you've done it 6 times over the last 3 or 4 years.
Right. So, I mean, what you're describing is politics at its finest, right? So if I bring a bill to committee, it gets out of committee, never makes it past that, I know that's going to happen, right? And let's say in my particular district or whatever, some of my constituents have brought this up and they're concerned about it, because every now and again, local law enforcement will mess up, DEA will mess up, and they'll raid the wrong house, they'll take the wrong property, they'll take somebody's track, they'll do something like that. So now this is being brought to attention. We got to appear like we're doing something about it, right? And I can go back to my community and I can say, hey, my bill's out there, we tried, we're going to keep fighting for this, don't you guys give up, I'm pushing for it, blah blah blah. I know it's not going to go anywhere. That's just politics. That's the way our system is set up. That's the way it's designed. And I think I said this during that hearing, the only way you're going to see real change around this area, because there's real money involved, is if folks keep putting these local law enforcement agencies, these politicians, on blast in a very public way, because the majority of folks don't even know this exists. Like you said, they don't know anything about it because it doesn't affect them. It doesn't impact them. So there are 2 ways to attack it. We could try to make it impact them. That's not going to happen, because that's going to require these law enforcement agencies to go into these wealthy communities and start knocking down doors and seizing property for opioid abuse, because, Karen or whoever took too many Oxy, or her kid took her bottle of prescriptions and went to school and started selling them. So we're going to take her brand new Benz that she got for her 16th birthday. So until you start seeing stuff like that happen, those folks aren't going to be negatively impacted by this. So we just kind of got to keep putting ourselves in position where we can change the legislation, that's why it's so important to not just vote on a national level, man. And I know people get tired of everybody screaming that, but it's so true. The thing that impacts us the most is at the local level, period.
And I'm so glad you literally went there, because it actually shifts me to a comment that we have. But before I shift there, were you the one on that hearing that was talking about if they did a stop, and it's like if you were driving a nice car, and if they did a stop, and they saw a pill bottle in the passenger seat of, if it was a white kid driving a car with a pill bottle in the passenger seat. Was that you telling the story?
Yeah, that was mine.
yeah. I was like, I thought that was you. That was the story. If I really want you to kind of quickly talk about that scenario, because I felt that was a real interesting scenario that you were talking about.
Well, I mean, the point was kind of going back to what we just talked about, was how do you bring this to the majority, right? And when I talk about majority, I'm not just talking about in population, I'm talking about in power. And in a way where they say, oh my God, there is so much room for abuse in the way these laws are designed. I don't feel comfortable with law enforcement agencies having this tool, right? Goes back to my tank analogy. If tanks start driving down Buckhead, policing the community, law enforcement agencies will no longer have tanks very quickly. Mm-hmm. That's just how it is. So my analogy was 16, 17-year-old white kids riding home from practice, whatever, speeding, cop pulls them over, notices a pill bottle containing some pills, unmarked, ask about it. Oh, these are mine or whatever, but there's no label in most states, and I think federally as well. Prescription drugs require a label on them, and let's say they test for oxy or some other kind of prescription narcotic, and they decide, okay, we think that, or we have probable cause to believe that you're doing something illegal with these drugs. We're going to then exercise our right to seize your vehicle. What do we think would happen with that? If that was done consistently as it's done in our communities, what do we think would happen? Civil forfeiture laws would no longer exist, period. That's just a fact. That's how things change in our country.
And you hit it when you were talking, going back to the statement you made about, having to understand the concept of, local level election and voting and things of nature. We are seeing across the country ever since, this, as we call, historic election that happened back in January, early January, when we were looking at Georgia, and everyone was looking at Georgia to determine what the control of the Senate was going to be and things of that nature. And Georgia turned and gave the Congress 2 senators. And then all of a sudden, all the GOP members go to, CPAC, and they go and come across. And now you have 33 different states that have this voter suppression laws. Right. On the docket. And here in Georgia, unfortunately, we're almost done with our session, and so we've already had a crossover date, and so both the legislation has already received the other side that passed out of our House is now in the Senate, right? And so these include now having to only do Sunday voting on one particular Sunday. Now you can't have early voting boxes. You can't have drop-off boxes unless it's particularly inside of an early voting precinct. They're now saying that you have to have some type of ID in order to even do absentee ballots. So they're now doing that. What would you say to individuals as pertains to how to advocate? Even if this becomes, because for many of these states, it's going to become law for most part, because especially if their state is in the majority, if the GOP is a majority, even if it becomes a law, how would you help tell others to advocate on their local level to ensure their votes are protected and that they're making sure that they're helping other people in that aspect?
Well, man, that's I think that was if we're not sad as a country right now, seeing that, and I'm independent. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican, but you can't deny what the Republicans are clearly doing, right? So even if I say, hey, I have some concerns about voter fraud and people not having IDs, okay, I know what it's about, but fine. You need folks to have an ID, fine. How do you justify or explain cutting off the time for people to come in and vote? How does that satisfy? And I mean vote in person, not drop off something, literally vote in person. You're saying, no. We're going to end voting at 7 p.m. instead of 9 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
What does that serve? You're clearly trying to prevent people from voting. So if we know that, we have to acknowledge that, one, there is an active, unapologetic pursuit to suppress the vote of, I won't say minorities, because then that's putting us in this sort of category where we only vote one way. Let's say Democrats or non-Republicans. That's what it is, right? We have to beat them at their own game. The only way the Democrats, to take it to federal, the only way the Democrats can even threaten the filibuster is because they're in power. They got in power because 7 million more folks said, no, we want Biden. We want Harris. We don't want Trump. 7 million more people did that. So you're going to have to acknowledge those. One, let's educate each other on what those restrictions are. Get into office so we can change them. Because we can protest all day. They're not going to change. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Protest all you want to. That's not going to work. You got to get in there and vote. Okay, 6 p.m., fine. We're going to be there at 5. And we're going to vote. And we're going to get our people in. And we're going to make the system fair as possible. That's the only way to do it.
And I'm so glad you actually mentioned protests, because of the fact in the state of Florida, and I'm actually going to have a buddy of mine who's a state rep in Florida. In the state of Florida right now, they've introduced HB 1, I believe it is 1, which is an anti-protest bill, which is actually, and there's some other states that are actually doing that. And Georgia even actually had a similar bill that came through a couple of years ago as well. But this is actually criminalizing individuals who are protesting, if you will. And for me, I thought that kind of goes against, one of those, amendments there. At least I thought. And tell it, is that actually even something that they can actually put into place that doesn't infringe on someone's right for freedom of speech or the ability to protest?
So, I mean, what you're describing to me is fundamental First Amendment violations, right? There's a reason the First Amendment is the First Amendment. Freedom of speech is the First Amendment. I think, our founding fathers understood, based on how this country was even formed, that the right to protest is a fundamental right and should not be infringed upon, period. And so what you see a lot of times, the strategy is we're going to put forward a bill that we know is unconstitutional, because what we want to do is we wanted to make it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, right? And that's a long road to get from this state past this bill. Is clearly unconstitutional. There's a challenge. The Supreme Court takes cert, hears it, all that. So there's a lot of hoops and everything to go through to get there. Now, unless there's a temporary restraining order staying that bill, that state is going to be able to abuse its power for years until it reaches the doorstep of the Supreme Court. So you see that gamesmanship a lot. You see that happening a lot. So so there's folks still going to be arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. There's folks who are still going to lose property, resources, money, time, jobs, right? Even though these folks know that on its surface, this law is unconstitutional. That's abuse of power 101.
And I guess this will be the kind of the last question or two that I have for you as an attorney, someone who has who has definitely served as prosecutor and just been in this particular arena for some time. What would you say has been your toughest, I want to say case, but the hardest thing you've had to see, especially being a Black man who is in the criminal justice system, what would you say has been the hardest thing you've had to see and have to potentially fight against in your tenure as an attorney?
I'm gonna be honest, man. I think the hardest thing for me is a lot of times seeing our own ignorance of the system that was clearly designed to oppress. Mm-hmm. I got so much pushback from my attorney friends, family, whatever, when I took a position as an assistant district attorney, because now I'm a sellout. I'm the man, I'm whatever. And I'm like, you don't understand how the system works. I now have the ability to say, I'm going to dismiss this charge. We're not going to go forward with this prosecution. I think that law enforcement officer violated somebody's civil rights or constitutional rights. I'm going to open an investigation on that agent.
That's right.
Or agency, right? A public defender, a defense attorney in this role I'm in now, I can't do that. I can protest like everybody else. I can call some people and say, hey, and they could ignore me. As a DA, I had the authority and the power to say, this is wrong. Let me do something about it. Man, I had cops telling me they're gonna watch my house burn down. I mean, it ain't an easy job to do. Mm-hmm. But if you want to affect some immediate change and have an immediate impact on the system, encourage us to go out there and be a part of it because the system in and of itself, the only flaw in the system is the people aspect. Mm-hmm. That's the flaw. So if you start plugging people in that have character and values, and I can't tell you how many times we're sitting at a round table and there's a young man, 14, 15-year-old kid, they're about to charge with first-degree murder just because they don't understand the culture. And I'm the only Black person in the room. And I'm like, no, that's normal behavior. That's not abnormal behavior. That's not a sign of guilt. That's not something that's so far fetched that you should then associate some mens rea or intent in the conduct that gets us to premeditated murder. You know what I mean? So having someone in the room to have those kind of conversations are key. And so I would say this, to answer your question, the long and the short of it, the most disappointing thing for me is sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Mm-hmm. And until we figure that part out, we're always going to get stepped on by the system.
I spent an opportunity. I did a talk about a month or so ago, and I used Hamilton. Particularly, there was a particular song in Hamilton that I used for the speech, was entitled "In the Room Where It Happens." Right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
And we talk about this concept, and I tell people often, if you've never seen Hamilton, even just look at it once, because there's so much that you'll see. Now, there are some information that's a little stretched a little bit, but for the most part, it's genuinely a good piece as it pertains to the history. Mm-hmm. And in that room, it's talking about how Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton is actually wheeling and dealing ultimately between the banks, as well as where to actually move the actual capital. And realizing, but Burr is actually not in that particular room, and he's actually having to sit out and not, he's just having to hear what's going on. And what people don't realize is, it takes, having people in that room, and what would that look like if we had more people in the room, if we had more people who are there to make the decision, i.e., what would that look like if we stop electing people just because, we knew they mama and they, but we don't necessarily know anything about them.
Right.
But we
don't
had
know that motivation.
They were, or because, they have a good spirit, but yet they don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. Right. And so what would that actually look like if we actually put people in position in place who actually had the heart for people, who can actually do the right things for people, whether that's in the DA's office, whether that be on school boards, whether that be in state houses or in the governor, the gubernatorial position, or in whatever capacity, right? If we had those people who can actually do the things that we need to do to push our community forward. The very last question I got for you.
Sure.
And this has really, truly been an amazing conversation. And if you all have other comments, if you have other questions that you may have, please don't hesitate to shoot them out to me, so I can definitely make sure that I shoot them to him. I definitely would love to have him back. Definitely bring him back and have discussion. I might need to bring him back for, attorney moment, or, to have a Q&A, to be able to have that. But we talk about, we have this whole, we've seen over the course of the year, over the course of the last couple of years, many cases around the country, as it pertains to violence, as it pertains onto either Black men or Black women across our country, and the influence. We're fighting, and we're seeing it even in the Asian community as well. But pertaining to our community, we're having people who are, for some apparent reason, that they hit it for a minute and they're excited about it for a minute, and then kind of we go on with our lives. It's almost becoming like we're immune to it, right. And it's becoming this normal, area, if you will. How do we, as a community, how do we as a people continue to speak to them? How do we continue to educate our people? How do we continue to create that space, that opportunity of being those mouthpieces and that drum of social justice, if you will? How do we continue to keep speaking their name so that sound, their name, don't die out?
I think you said it, man. Keep speaking their names, and if we haven't learned anything from COVID, I think what we figured out is how we can function in this social experiment and these small kind of pods, right? So if you, and I don't know how large your audience is, so forgive me, if you are able to reach, a couple thousand people, and then with your platform, you're saying their name, now it's personal. Now we've connected. Now we have these pods of folks who care, right? The big national protest, Seattle, I don't know what was happening there. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think a lot of times our movements get hijacked for other reasons. Mm-hmm. And they become, like you said, you become not just desensitized, but you become removed from the movement itself in a way, because now it's not about you. Like, I had no idea I can't relate to what was happening in Seattle. I know what they said, but based on what they were doing, it had nothing to do with me. I can honestly say that. But in my crew, and with my friends, in my group, in my social group, what we were doing, it had everything to do with me, and that's my community. And I think for us as a people, we have had this issue, and that's been by design, of what is the Black community? What do we mean to each other? What kind of relationship and interrelationship do we have? And how do we support and build and grow each other for the success of all of us? And that's how I think we should do it. Local government, local community, keep saying their name, man. Don't stop.
And I think if we were to leave a parting note, just it starts. We definitely always continue to fight. We're continuously speaking the names of all of our loved ones who we lose nationwide. We have to keep speaking their name, but we have to make sure that if we're not continuously taking care of home, if we're not continuously taking care of our community, if we're not, you can make a major impact on your street,
yep,
in your city. That's a little small town, in your school. You can make a small impact, at your church. If you go to the grocery stores or wherever, in your social groups, we can make these small impacts. And I think that's what makes us great. We think that we have to be on these major platforms. We feel like we have to be in these major organizations to make a difference. But these major organizations need a small groups of individuals to bound together and to band together to ultimately make, these things work. I love using quotes. I love using movies and things of that nature. And I've used it twice. I remember on Soul Food, when Big Mama said, listen, when you're talking about that fish, she said, all the fingers together they can all accomplish something different. But when they come together, they make a mighty blow. And what would that look like if we all utilize our own individualized gifts and talents and nuances and just use those for the betterment of our community and not fight against each other, but fight with each other so that we can make that difference. And I think that, for me, I think is going to make us greater and make us stronger. Once we begin to see, again, don't allow the noises and the nuances of things going on to deter or stray us from the ultimate goal. Yeah, government's going to do what they're going to do, but we have to keep our eyes on the prize. And so that's my prayer, is that we continue to continue to keep our eyes on the prize and don't get strayed or distracted by everything else that's going on, because we still have a fight.
Yep.
Still have a fight. Listen, it is now 8 o'clock. I can go on and go on and go on and go on, but first of all, I gotta let this brother go because of the fact that technically he is on a different time zone than I am.
Yep.
And so he, and plus, we want to allow you all the ability to go back and again share this with your family, share this with your friends. We would definitely bring them back. We will definitely have more discussion. I truly appreciate you for being a part of this experience with us. Please do not hesitate to join us anytime you want to come and just talk and have discussion. We don't have to talk about civil asset forfeiture. We can just talk about whatever Chris Bellamy want to talk about, right?
Look, I'm a lawyer. I like to talk, man. That's what we do.
But again, please make sure you're checking us every Monday night at 7 o'clock for this episode. And then, of course, we do a recap at 12:45 every Tuesday. So tomorrow, 12:45, we do a recap of today's show, and then we do a replay at 1 o'clock. So please make sure you join that. Please join us again next week as we have a great panel of men and women coming together to have discussion as a man thinketh and as a woman thinketh, coming together to just talk about situations, whether it be life, love, liberation, and loss. That's what we do here. Remember, this is PickEd Speaks, where Black excellence speaks for itself. Until we meet again, please remember that I love you and God does too. God bless you and have a good night.